Good morning. My name is Wee Lam, and I'd like to share my experience as a consumer and producer of technology, especially during the current COVID pandemic crisis. Most of what I share is in the context of my leadership role for the British Foundation of International Reconstructive Surgery and Training, or BFIRST, which is the official charity of our UK Plastic Surgery Association. We currently have projects in 10 to 15 countries. The nature of this work involves us traveling to these countries and teaching surgery within an apprentice-style environment. There is no substitute for that. And technology, when utilized, should only be as part of that strategy. And this is our four-pronged strategy, which we published recently in the Journal of Hand Surgery European. Online mentoring is a 2-year program where we conduct monthly webinars with the aim of building a community of practice. And this has worked very well so far with a steady group of 10 to 15 attendees from various countries. We deliberately kept it small to achieve our aim of building that community of practice, and we have been doing this for nearly 2 years. But then suddenly everything changed with COVID. As you know, the UK has been hit pretty hard by COVID, but it is a global crisis. It is a pandemic, and with that, all of our trips have been cancelled, and the result is that virtual learning and our Peaceful Sunday webinars have suddenly been propelled to the forefront as the only mode of teaching. And so on that background, I want to briefly share my experience of a consumer as well as a producer of remote technology, where everything has been shifted online, and to discuss the pros and cons of each. Now, most of you will understand this from the current lockdown situation. There is a difference between talking to somebody online via Zoom and in person. You don't get the same verbal or non-verbal cues. In Zoom, only one person is allowed to speak at a time, and it's very difficult to have informal chats or to share anything physical. And these are all things that we take for granted, which we only really understood and appreciate when we get to finally meet in real life. The feeling is so different, and I think it impacts on education and how we teach. Now, this is what one seasoned educator said after delivering a lecture to a large group and now being asked to give his lecture online. I am missing the buzz of live performance. Comparing webinar with speaking to a hall of 1,000 attendees, I would have looked at the body language, the nods, the chuckles, the frowning of the audience in order to adjust my delivery. The lecture theatre has a mood and electricity of its own, which is sadly missing when I'm speaking into my laptop. My own experience as an educator has taught me that online teaching is not just a different channel of delivering educational content. When it becomes the only mode of teaching, we have to remember that not only the channel, but the content may need to be changed. Attention span when listening to a virtual lecture is much less, because in a sense it's like watching a screen that we can turn on and off. For that reason, we need to build in deliberate interaction time and think about a shift from pedagogy to andragogy, which is based on adult learning principles. The flipped classroom concept is key to this, and the educator needs to build in ways to facilitate both synchronous and asynchronous learning. Now, most of these principles apply to a smaller group, but I want to move on now to virtual conferences, which present challenges of its own. For many of us, medical conferences are the traditional pinnacle events of the year. This was a conference I attended in March this year. I believe it was probably the last normal conference, maybe forever, before everything went into shutdown. It was a surreal experience. People weren't sure how to behave. Many talks were cancelled and shifted online, and since then every major conference has either moved online or have been cancelled. Now, at first glance, teleconferences present an attractive, even superior alternative. Participating in a medical conference has never been cheap, with registration fees, travel and accommodation fees. The capacity for attendance needs no longer be limited to the confines of a lecture hall. Teleconferences level the playing field for participants from low to middle income countries. But the returns of medical conference can be equally invaluable and intangible. The efforts made by the attendee in order to attend a conference heightens our mental capacity to learn. The real value perhaps lies with the opportunities for networking. One also needs to think about the digital divide. Virtual conference depends on a reliable connectivity, and so many things that we take for granted cannot be easily accessed in certain countries. For the remainder of this talk, I want to share my own experience and lessons learned from a recent conference that I organized, and also from the monthly webinars. This was a trauma symposium mainly aimed at LMICs during the COVID crisis, and this chart showed the countries that attended, mostly from the African and Asian continents. So what did I learn? Well, firstly, the organization. There are many similarities between organizing a physical conference and a virtual one, but also many differences. For both, one worry about the contents, speakers, and program. For the physical conference, I used to worry about the food, accommodation, leaflets, personnel on the day, but there is no such worry for a virtual one. The advertisement is so different for both, as you probably would have found out by now. The only technology I worry about for a physical conference is the AV, but in the virtual conference, technology is everything. And finally, there is the question of fees. Is it justifiable to charge people anything for a virtual conference? Secondly, registration. For a virtual conference, you get a link to register that can be shared easily, and this can quickly reach many people. Other useful things that can help when organizing registration for a virtual conference is to do a survey at the same time as registration to get an idea of who they are. And the info that we send out needs to mainly relate to the technology. Thirdly, it's very useful to have a rehearsal. You never do a rehearsal for a physical conference, or for most physical conferences, but for a virtual one, there are so many technologies to get right. People may be familiar with it, or they may not be. You need to practice sharing screens, practice the flow, check each other's background in case there are any embarrassing things you don't want people to see, and you need to get help. Fourthly, talks should be short or shorter. We made a provisional program and then told everyone to shorten their talk by 5 minutes and to make it punchy with clear objectives. Videos should be minimized because of the bandwidth problem, and remind everyone that the talks are recorded so that they can view it later on in case they miss anything. It is difficult enough to keep people's attention for a live lecture. It is even harder for a virtual one. As mentioned, people have this subconscious feeling they can channel surf or web surf and turn it off and on. We got to find a way to keep their attention. I remain undecided about breaks, as I think people take breaks themselves all the time, but if we schedule breaks, it is important to have an interesting talk so people will come back. We are often warned not to take pictures of someone's slides in a physical conference. People still do, but it's very obvious. But there is no way you can control this in a virtual conference. People will screenshot the presentation all the time and then share it online. So the only way is to be more careful with what you want to share. Fifth lesson, we need help. I think I've mentioned that already. It is very useful to have an assistant host who handles the technology and who is not giving any talks. It takes the stress off the moderator and the host. To keep the people engaged, the assistant host can conduct polls and organize question and answers to channel back to the moderator, and this frees up the moderator. The moderator has the task of maintaining balance to keep the seminar going, which is the next lesson. During the session, the moderator has to control the flow, involve the panelists, engage the audience, and also handle the speakers. There are a lot of things to think about for a host, and it's helpful to have at least 2 screens, sometimes more. And this picture shows the different things you have to balance when hosting a virtual conference. So will things ever be normal again? Will we ever go back to our old way of teaching, learning, and attending conferences? Probably not. To take on the Francis Bacon quote about money, technology is a great servant but bad master. It is important we learn the new language of remote learning because COVID may change forever the way we teach and learn. Hopefully this lesson shared will help our jobs as medical educators. Thank you.